Alright guys, so this is what I'm going to be drawing today. I'm going to be working and going over shadow and how to build up the layers of shadow. Alright, so let's get to it. So, for this video, what I'm using is an H, a B, and a 4B. H being the hardest, and is what I'm using here for the light line and the outline. It'll also be used for whatever very light shadow is needed for the entire thing. Along with that, the B and the 4B, those are used for the medium shadows and the dark shadows. So with adding in this rough outline, this one being focused on shadowing and not getting all of the proportions right and everything to be looking perfect, what I was really focusing on is just getting that shape in there to start working on the little intricacies of the shadows. So in this area, what I'm doing is putting in the two dark areas on the apple, being the top where the stem comes in, and then there's this little divot where a branch must have been growing into the apple. So this, and why I zoomed in, is because this is a very similar technique to cross-hatching, except when you're going back and forth over it, you're not necessarily emphasizing the line, such as a crosshatch is. Using the side of your pencil in a very light touch, what you're basically doing is a smooth transitional buildup of the shadow itself. So here, quick motions back and forth. This is sped up in 2 times, so it's a little bit faster than normal, but it's not horribly fast. So what you really want to focus on for this time is to block in the general contrast, basically. You're making it so that the object you're working on is not the background you're working on. What I did there was I took the hard pencil and just gave a bit of a shadow on the apple to separate it from that background. Also, with this entire piece, there wasn't a super bright, so mostly my fault in setting up a more generic still life as opposed to a dynamic one, but this also helps with the subtler shadow buildups that you often can get. So here what I'm working on is that double lit. So we have the light coming from the top, the natural and artificial from my window and from my lamp, but also the reflective light coming in on the bottom of the apple from the table, and just the lighter objects in my room that reflect the light. So that's why this apple has this middle shadow. Another thing that I'm working on in this area is, once again, building up that small base. You want to work your entire piece, and I mean from your main objects. If you have like an idea for a background, you don't need to work on that. But for all of your main pieces, you want to work them up in one layer. So if you have a light layer you're putting in, put the light layer in on everything, and you have your midtones. You put your midtones in on everything, and then you put your shadows in. And this is starting to help with that. Granted, you do have to put in a dark and a light if you have those super dark contrasts to make sure your midtones are in proper proportion to one another. But like you can see here, I did that. I put in my darks, and soon I'll be establishing a dark underneath. But in order to keep the entirety of the piece together and cohesive, you also have to keep adding in little bits throughout the entire thing. So it's not a printer. We're not working from the left side of our piece to the right side of the piece, so we don't smudge anything with our hands. There are some people that can do that, and that is a talent and a skill that they've built up. The majority of people can make a significantly better and easier drawing using this technique, where you're building up your entire piece in a layer. So now I wanted to add in the shadow underneath the apple to sort of solidify that edge. When it comes to adding in a dark shadow underneath something, or if you find your object has a dark area, adjusting the angle of your pencil from this flat, smooth back and forth motion to a more pointed direction has and does really help with how the mark is made. And that is what I was doing there. The darker the mark I needed, the sharper my angle and the more like perpendicular my pencil becomes to my paper. In this area, what I needed to do was add in a background shade because of that super bright reflective light on the back of the apple, and it wasn't going to catch if I didn't have that, and the apple would have had a weird shape on the paper. So little tricks like that of just adding in a background shadow, even if it's not necessarily in front of you on your piece that you're working on. So giving this rough shape in the background over here gives the apple a grounded and more solidified feel, and that's the importance of shadows underneath, or shadows in representation to objects. They give them a grounded area, and it really holds the object to the paper. In this area, the pressure that I'm adding is a little bit more, but I'm still not bearing down on my pencil. I'm never going to push really hard. I'm going to jump up in softness numbers. So if I needed something super dark in comparison to what I have right now, I would switch from my 4B to a 6B or a 5B or an 8B, depending upon where everything is and what is actually needed. But now that I have that darkest dark on the bottom, the darkest dark on the top sort of solidified, I can go back into the middle and really establish where all that is. Now, when it comes to softening your mark making and the edges of your shadows, you want to do two things. One is use a very light touch, and two is use the side of your pencil. And then all the next pieces that make that really work is just as you come to the end or the edge of where a shadow will be, remember to utilize your other pencils. So what I mean by that is if I have a B and a 4B, I'm going to be switching between those as I come from the edge of my shadow to the light portion of the apple. And that will help to soften those edges and make them significantly more understandable as a smooth transition. So this being like a smooth surfaced apple, I'm not going to have these hard edges that would come with a box or that would come with a more manufactured object. So this is the exact thing that I was talking about. Switching pencils, using a lighter one, and working those shadows in and making it so that they aren't as hard-edged or scratchy on the areas. You can see how far back my hand is when it's actually holding the pencil. And that's another step and another thing that's super important when you want to make sure that motorcycle just passed my window. When you want to make sure that you're not going to bear down too hard, or that your pencil strokes aren't going to be too visible. That the way that you hold your pencil is something that actually affects a lot of how your marks are actually going to be on the page. So that's it. Hope you liked this process and this video. I have a little trick at the end to soften up the background edge where you just smudge with your finger, and that sort of gives it a nice airy feel. So if you guys like this, subscribe, ask questions. The way that I make more videos is by knowing what you guys want. So I will see you guys in the next one.